One of the things that makes me angry about Christianity and religion sometimes is that it picks on people who are vulnerable. You know, when you pick on the gay community and tell them they can't get married, pick on young girls who get pregnant, but you don't pick on the guys who got them pregnant.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 36. Before I jump into the introduction of today's guest, I just had a few things I wanted to mention. The first is I wanted to thank everybody who's provided me with feedback regarding the podcast. I had an episode a couple of weeks ago about the length of the podcast, different types of podcasts, and ideas that were kind of swirling around in my head, and I wanted to know what you guys thought. So I appreciate everybody who reached out and gave me some of that feedback. Based on some of the feedback I received, and just kind of my own preferences, I am going to revert back to trying to keep the interview together. So today's my first attempt at getting back to that. That's how the podcast started. And the interviews go long, and for some people that's too much. But what I figure is if they're interested enough in the interview, they'll continue to listen at a later time, or listen to half on their commute into work and the other half on their commute home. The only downside to that is by keeping the podcast episode together. That means that if I'm doing the same amount of editing each week, I will be doing a bi-weekly podcast or just an every other week podcast. So as much as I like to provide you with a weekly podcast, I also like keeping the episodes together, so it's a trade-off. So that's pretty much it as far as podcast news goes. Just a reminder, I'm always looking for a variety of guests and a variety of deconversion stories. And in fact, if you are part of an atheist group or a humanist group and you want to come on the podcast and share about that group, even if you don't have a story to tell, let me know. I'd be interested in talking to you. So just shoot me an email, steve@vodpodcast.com. Now, to introduce my guest today, my guest was a preacher's kid and did things such as helped with youth ministry and hosted a church TV show. It was like a talk show. One of the things that really stuck out to me in this interview was the significance and importance of the roles that friendships and relationships play in these different transitions in life. So getting into church, how important it is to have people in church that encouraged us and kind of brought us into the church and kept us in the church. And then as we start to question things and start to, free ourselves from religion, it's friends and people that are close to us that help us in that transition as well. I feel like that was a theme of today's interview. Another theme, he mentions it several times, is the phrase seeds of doubt. That was something that really stuck in my mind from this interview too. My guest today has some wonderful things to say, some great inspirational quotes that I had a hard time picking the quote because there were so many wonderful things that I wanted to use for the opening quote of this episode. But he went from being a Baptist preacher's kid to now an atheist, and he is a part of the Black Non-Believers of Cincinnati. I really enjoyed meeting him, and he's just a genuinely nice guy. You're going to really enjoy meeting him and hearing his story. So without further ado, here's my interview with Treigg Turner. All right, well, Treigg, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. I'm kind of excited. This is my first atheist interview, so I'm kind of looking forward to it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I am too. It'll be fun to hear your story. Well, why don't we just start by, I guess I always like to ask people, what term they prefer to use. So if someone, do you like atheist, humanist, or is there another term that you prefer?
I mean, there's so many. A lot of them I don't have a problem with. I started off agnostic, and I kind of looked it up because, when I was kind of leaving religion, you have that label, and you're looking for another label. So you're like, well, what am I? So I started off as, agnostic, and then I saw that there was a agnostic theist and an agnostic non-theist, and so I'm reading and I'm like, I'm not really sure. So I kind of moved from there, and after I realized, I'm like, I don't even believe any of this stuff. Like, there's no way I'm going back, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I just said, you know what? Atheism seemed like such a scary word. When you're raised as a Christian, it's like, well, if I leave God, then I don't know what I am, but atheist seems like hardcore. I don't know if I
Yeah.
want to be that.
Yeah.
So I'm very comfortable with atheist, humanist, skeptic, free thinker, all those things.
Yeah, right on. Well, how did we'll jump into your story. So, how did Christianity influence you during your childhood?
Oh well, I am a preacher's kid, so I was raised Christian, and so my parents were Baptists when I was in early elementary. However, I've got an older sister, and she remembers my parents when before they had kind of really got serious about the church. So they used to party and drink and smoke and all that good stuff. So I remember all the boring parts of my parents. So,
That's
so,
funny.
so we were
Is it?
raised Baptist, and uh, my parents were very literal when it came to their theology. And so they had some theological differences with that Baptist church that they were going to early on in my early elementary school age. And then further on in elementary school, they went to another Baptist church. And once again, they had some theological problems and problems with the fact that some of the leadership didn't follow the word of God the way
Mm.
they thought it should have been followed. So they moved to a non-denominational style church. So I was kind of raised to really look at the word literally, and so my parents really didn't mess around. I really found out that my parents were stricter than other parents in the church, and I remember the time I found out. I was going home from church with another family and kind of spending time with them after church. And so I get in the car, and kids are in the back seat. And so the dad of my friend turns on secular radio, and I'm like blown away. Like, what? Like, we can't listen to secular radio. And he's bumping his head and kind of grooving to the beat, listening to some R&B. And my parents were just strictly gospel. It was just gospel music in our house. And so I'm like, wait a minute. They're listening to like worldly music. And so that was a major event for me because of
Wow.
how I was raised, within my household. So I started to figure out that people practiced their Christianity differently, even within the same church. So for me, that was just groundbreaking.
Wow.
And so my journey as a preacher's kid, you kind of expected to live a certain way, talk a certain way, do certain things a certain way. And I kind of took the mantle, and I was learning scripture at a young age, and we had a Bible study at the pastor's house in the basement with the other kids. And I'm winning trophies for memorizing so many scriptures and
Yeah.
knowing the books of the Bible from Genesis to Revelations by heart. And so I was like eating it up. So I kind of grew up in this, and then having parents that were very literal, or as literal as they could be when it came to the Bible and their theology. you know I took it serious too.
Mm.
So I kind of blame them for where I'm at now, and I kind of tell them, like, it's your fault. I mean, you told me to read this and take it literally, and I did. So probably probably more than the other kids, because they kind of almost practice what they preached a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always hear preachers say, "Oh, study the word," and they'd have all these nice little scriptures that told you how to study the word, and So I kind of overdid it, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna, know as much as I can."
And how young were you at that time?
So um, this was still kind of elementary school
Mm-hmm.
age, and then when they started moving into non-denominational, well, there was another big event in my life. My parents started going to separate churches, and so
Oh, interesting.
that was huge, um, because my dad was a real like a man's man kind of thing, and then you put that in the church context, and as far as the man is head of the woman, and God's head of the man, and so that whole leadership of your family thing was a big deal for him. So my mom
Yeah.
not wanting to go to the same church was a big source of argument in the household. So I grew
And
up
so
hearing,
he was a preacher. You were a preacher's kid. So he preaching at this other church or?
well, he never made it to, the main preacher. He was always like the associate pastor,
Mm-hmm.
of the churches. So there would be a pastor, and then there would be my dad. So, and so that was a big stigma for him because, this man who is associate pastor and kind of a fire and brimstone preacher, his wife doesn't want to go to the same church. And
Wow.
so, that was a big thing for me. And so as a teenager or a preteen, I kind of played my parents against each other a little bit because I'd say, "Oh, I want to
Yeah.
go to her church or I want to go to his church." And I know that kind of tore him apart a little bit. Me trying to waffle between going to church with him and going to church with my mom. Eventually, I started really liking my mom's church because they had more kids my age, and I got
Mm-hmm.
along with those preteens and teenagers, and they had cute girls at this church.
Well, that's gonna
Dad's
help.
church didn't have cute girls or hardly any girls my age, so for me it was like an easy decision.
Yeah. As a teenage boy,
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
but these started kind of giving me some seeds of doubt, where I'm like, well, God's talking to both of these people, right? And how come they're not hearing the same thing about which church to go to? And so there was just little seeds of doubt, and then I kind of brush it off because, you know, they're kind of right. They believe in Christianity, but,
Yeah.
they just have some personal differences. So,
Now, up to this point, your siblings, how were they taking? How were they? How was their faith playing out? Was it similar to you? Because you said you took it really seriously. You were memorizing verses. Were your siblings doing similar things?
so I just had an older sister, and she took it just as serious as I did. By the time middle school hit and my parents start going to opposite churches, she was in college by this time. So I
Okay.
kind of bore the brunt of this division that was happening between them. So she kind of got spared that. But my sister, when she got to college, she ended up, bumping into some students there at the school she was going into. And one of the students happened to be a pastor's kid. And she ended up getting real tight with them. And so that kind of continued, her religious experience. And so she's still very religious to this day. Um,
Okay.
so kind of that growing up with that chasm really just fell on my shoulders. And I know we've talked about it, within recent years as adults, and kind of let her know about how that experience affected me. And so she kind of saw it from a distance a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so she realized, it's like, wow, you went through a lot, kind of staying
That's
up with
cool.
mom and dad. So it was a really deep conversation we went through, just talking about how that all happened and panned out. And so I told her some stories that went on that she hadn't, you know, heard about or experienced. So, I mean, it was a pretty big deal. So,
Yeah, especially
uh,
for someone who's really religious like her,
oh
to be able
yeah,
to
yeah,
empathize. Not that she's not empathetic, but it's hard for people who are really religious like that to empathize with someone who left religion sometimes.
Right. Well,
or it can be. Yeah.
and so I know she still has a pretty tough time with it, but at the time I was still, pretty headstrong with Christianity. Um, as I got older, I was helping out with like, the youth ministry at church, and this is at my mom's church mostly, because they
Mm-hmm.
had things and activities for the youth to get into. My dad's church was more adult focused. They had some kids, but you were right there with the adults. My
Mm.
mom's church had like a youth ministry, and they had activities for the youth, things in the summertime, retreats. So I was, much more involved that way with her
Yeah.
church. So, that was kind of a middle school, high school thing. And then, my parents eventually split up, and I think that was like the meat of it was, those two church experiences, was a big thing for them. And so I was
Wow.
kind of watching how each church would treat each one of the parents. And I really
Mm.
didn't like that. They kind of started pitting my parents against each other a little bit,
Mm.
based on their brand of theology and what the man should be able to do and how independent the woman could be, within the
Wow.
Christian construct. And so I started watching and evaluating this. And this was another area of, don't you guys talk to the same person? How come the same person isn't giving you the same advice? This could be squashed very easily.
Yeah. They're so supposed to be an absolute truth, right?
Yeah. So just those were, and that was a big theme for me, just kind of throughout, my journey from Christianity to kind of waffling a little bit, and then going back to kind of Christianity because I trusted, certain people. But that's a huge theme is, if you all pray and have a relationship with this same God, how come he's telling all of you guys different things?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
but yeah, so,
Wow.
after high school, in college, college, I was just glad to get away from my parents and all the things that I was going through at home. So, freshman year was just, party, party, party. Um, and, eventually I kind of, in college, you kind of get back to your roots a little bit. Um, but that was kind of my, my growing up experience in the church.
Hmm. And would you say that when you got into college that you still had a pretty strong relationship with God, or?
Yeah, I would say that because my sister had moved to St. Louis, and that's where she went to school. And so
Hmm.
I started going to school in St. Louis, and the family that had kind of taken her in, they kind of took me in and made me a part of their family. And I started going to church with them and getting to know them really well. And they became good friends of both of my parents, as a matter of fact.
Mm.
So I kind of got back into it and, even evangelized a little bit in college. And when I was home for the summers, I would start going back to my mom's church because those were the relationships that I had formed the strongest, through
Yeah.
middle school and high school. Um, and I even remember being so involved at my mom's church. I had my own talk show. It was
Oh,
like it
wow.
was like a public access type of thing. And one of the guys who was at church, he worked at the cable station, and so he brings some of the equipment over. So I'm like a little Montel Williams. I've got a little microphone, and and this was really aimed towards the teens and younger preteens in the church. And we would talk
Hmm.
about issues about sexuality and music and virtue and all these things that we felt affected teenagers and young people. And so the
Yeah.
church really liked the way I was kind of coming on in my faith. And they felt that I was the best tool to reach some of the younger kids. Here I am,
Mm.
fresh out of high school, I'm in college. Some of these younger kids are looking up to me. And hey, he seems like, and I kind of felt like they would talk about certain subjects with me to convince me of them, and then say, okay, we've now convinced Treigg about these certain topics about, relationships and sexuality and all the music and all these things. We've got Treigg convinced. Now let's put a mic in front of his face and then put a camera there, and now he can convince some of the younger kids what we just convinced him of.
Did you, when you look back on it, do you feel like they were kind of using you then,
Oh,
or?
absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
And I don't think it was malicious,
yeah,
but when you've got that kind of tool in front of you, you have the opportunity. Hey, we can really get this message to the kids. Let's go ahead and use Treigg. He seems like he's upstanding, kind of clean cut. All the parents love him, and let's go ahead and do this.
and you must have enjoyed it because you were doing like, how long did you do it for?
May have lasted for like a year, and we had a whole lot of takes, um, and so I enjoyed getting in front of the camera and having the mic in my hand, and I remember debating some of the teenagers because we talk about dancing at school dances and how close to get, and I mean all these little details that the adults had convinced me of, I'm trying to convince these teenagers of.
Pass it
And they're
on.
like, hey, what, we can't listen to R. Kelly? And so I'm breaking down R. Kelly songs like, listen to him. He's talking about bumping and grinding. And so that's not, how does that fit into your belief system? And some of this was easy for me to take in because of how strict my parents were. And so, there are a lot of things that I couldn't do in my household. And so I was just an easy target for some of these adults. I was already
Yeah,
groomed pretty
it all
well at
made
this time.
sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bumped into, a lot of these teenagers now. And, they're,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Nowadays?
yeah, because, they looked up to me. And so now we're all adults. And, a few of them know that I'm an atheist. And they're like, wow, but they'll share some of the gripes that they had about that church with me because they know I'll listen.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So,
Well, you said you had evangelized a little bit in college. Can you give me an example of the type of evangelizing you would do?
more one-on-one. I didn't really stand on tables and kind of do that type of preaching to passerbys on campus, but more one-on-one. I talked to some of my friends about Jesus and going to church and all those things that would help them move on and move forward as adults. um, so it was more kind of one-on-one. Yeah.
Yeah, just being a good Christian and telling people the good news and
And I had a
stuff like
friend
that.
who I remember once I told him about this relationship with God that I have, and I'm going to church all the time, and it actually sparked him to kind of reconnect with his church roots. And so
Hmm.
his church roots, I thought mine were strict. His were ridiculously strict. I mean, this was it was so limiting and crushing and overbearing, and I think he was kind of like an apostolic faith, where the
Okay.
women wore long skirts or dresses and no makeup and no jewelry. I mean,
Wow.
this was a very, very kind of strict. And I remember him talking about how he received the Holy Spirit, and they would, at his church, they would pretty much lock you into a room, or if it was a big event, you'd be in a big gym with other people. And there was this term called tarry with the Lord. And so you would tarry, which means you would just wait and pray and hope and kind of open your heart mentally, to God, waiting for this big like fire or river of the Holy Spirit to come and fill you and hit you and just blow you off your feet. And then all of a sudden you start speaking in tongues, and supposedly you wouldn't be able to stop speaking in tongues. You would just be uncontrollably speaking in this weird language and, pass out and, all the other theatrics that go with it. And so he's telling me about that. And, he invited me to come to one of those. And even as Christian as I was like, that doesn't sound
good. I was involved in a little bit of charismatic stuff when I was later high school years, so I got exposed to that quite a bit.
Oh man, it's pretty scary, because you almost literally, the way he described it, you cannot leave until this happens to you.
So that's almost cult-like.
Oh, very, very
real
cult-like.
Controlling.
And so that was even too much for me, at the time, because.
So did you actually end up going with him?
No, I didn't end up.
You were like, I'm not even gonna get into that. Yeah, that's probably the safe thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was horrified of that.
Scary.
He was making it sound like this was the most wonderful thing since sliced bread, and I'm sitting there like, there's no way in hell I'm going with you.
You're like, they lock you in a room. It's really great.
But around that time, I had joined the church there in St. Louis, and I went through new member orientation, and so I would say this was your midline non-denominational church.
Okay.
They weren't too loosey-goosey, but they weren't extremely strict. They were kind of middle of the road. And I remember joining and going to new member classes. And there again, I was exposed to that, laying on the hands and expecting the Holy Spirit, to come through me within speaking of tongues. So, for me, I was a little weirded out that they expected me to do that during this new member orientation.
Yeah.
So they just said, just open yourself up and da-da-da-da. And I didn't feel like I couldn't leave, but I just felt that immense pressure, like, oh my God, if it doesn't happen, what are they going to think of me? Or what am I going to think of myself? Am I just, that far gone where, So I was a little scared, a little worried, felt a lot of pressure. And I just remember them just kind of putting their palm of their hand on my forehead and just trying to push me back. And I wouldn't fall. It's because I didn't feel anything. And so they're trying. And so, I think I just pretended that it happened so they'd stop. I said, well, if I pretend, and it was quick thinking, and I had to think about this, afterward. And I remember thinking, I wonder how many people fake it, so they'll just leave them alone.
Interesting. I remember doing that when I was in high school. I was at a church, and it was, I'd seen other people get slain in the spirit before, but I'd never done it. And I remember going up front, and I remember in front of a whole bunch of people at the church, they were doing this. And I remember that feeling of like, I was trying to let it happen, but it just, like, you expect to just fall over and be overcome by God, but it doesn't really happen. So you kind of convince yourself that, well, at least I did, that it was God, but I was faking it. Like, I was just trying to make it happen, I think, or something.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, I could probably remember some of the ways that I spoke in tongues, like now, like the words I made up, because they would be the same words that I heard everyone say, or kind of same dialect or whatnot, and rhythm of it. And so I remembered how to do that from the churches that I had been to. And so I could make that up pretty easily. Yeah. And so that was another one of those seeds of doubt that I had, because as I read on, I was very literal. So I read up on speaking in tongues because, one, I'm wondering, well, why isn't this happening for me? And so I kind of read the specific scriptures of it, and it just hit me. I said, everyone's doing this incorrectly. I said, if you do it at church, you're supposed to have an interpreter. And, there's all these little rules and regulations that are supposed to kind of come with speaking in tongues. And I said, no one's following this. And so once again, I'm like, who's really talking to God? because none of these people are doing it the way it's written in this book that everyone says that they follow. And so there was another seed of doubt. The more I tried to, come full circle with, Christianity and run with it, the more I realized that, there's some things that aren't making sense here.
Yeah. You're seeing people kind of adapt Christianity to what they want it to be rather than what's actually in the Bible.
Yeah, yeah. And so those type of things, I'm like, well, if the word of God is so pure and it's so holy and it's so powerful, why do people make stuff up?
Yeah.
If this is so real, just one word of God should be able to just do all kind of things for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like people are making stuff up to fill in the gaps or the things that don't make sense. And and so, for me, there was a lot of that kind of stuff building up. Like why would something so true need a lie to prop it up?
That's a good point.
So that was a pretty interesting time, for me in college. And I think that, I kept pushing forward with my religion because there were certain figures in my past that I really looked up to. People I thought were really good people. And so the idea is, if these people are that good, there's got to be something to this religion.
Yeah.
They wouldn't do that to me. They wouldn't lie to me or lead me in the wrong way or, deceive me. And so I think there were times where when I was a little bit younger, say in my 20s, approaching 30, that I was tempted to say, hey, this is garbage. I can't deal with this stuff anymore. But what would draw me back would be my trust and faith in people.
Wow.
And so one of the people that I grew to like was, he was the pastor of the church my sister went to. And their family was so welcoming and friendly and nice. And, it was just a great family to be around. And I looked up to him because every now and then he would toss me a couple nuggets of wisdom. And I'd be like, wow, that was so inspiring. And so I really put him on a pedestal. And I think it was figures like that and my parents, where I'd say, hey, I know this doesn't make sense. I'm just going to kind of chuck this in the mysteries of God bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Because these people wouldn't lead me the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah, that bucket starts to fill up.
Yeah.
It's a mystery.
It fills up really
quick. A mystery.
You end up getting more and more buckets because that bucket fills up so fast.
Yeah, exactly.
And I realized that, when Christians now find out that I'm an atheist, and we'll have some debates or spirited conversations, they usually fall back on that. Well, that's just one of the mysteries of God. You'll just have to have faith. And I realized how much I held on to that concept to stay a Christian. Mm-hmm. That's just a mystery of God. I just have to have faith. And so, when I hear it come back to me, it's amazing. I'm like, wow, I really know where they are right now.
Yeah, it really has nothing to do with the facts it really just has to do with they need to just have faith, so they're just not gonna, they have to put that aside. They can't think about it or whatever.
Yeah, it's that head in the sand, type of thing going on, where they may hear something that makes a lot of sense, very logical. 1 + 1 = 2. Yep, that makes sense. Okay, if it's 2, there's no God. No, well.
No. It's just a mystery. We don't know how,
it's a mystery, but that 2 it's a mysterious 2.
Mysterious math.
Yeah, so it's very interesting when I start hearing the same apologetics that I used to give.
Yeah.
And when it comes back to you, you know, it doesn't surprise you. It almost makes you feel bad for, that person who's using it, because you realize that that was a total cop out. And it was a way of, shifting the conversation away from the obvious 1 + 1 = 2, the undeniable,
Right.
part of the conversation that's staring them in the face. And they have to, kind of use a technique to help them keep playing mental gymnastics. And they'll say, okay, well, that's just a mystery of God, or you just don't understand the ways of God, and you're just going to have faith. And I'm solid in my faith in God. And I hear the rhetoric that's just, it's been beaten into them. And so
Yeah.
it's almost like studying for a test. And, you're pounded and pounded with this information. And now when something makes you uncomfortable, you can resort to it like muscle memory.
Mm,
And
that's
so,
true.
I can see that with, more of the seasoned people. A lot of the folks who aren't as seasoned, um, they'll say, well, you need to talk to my pastor.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. It's like you've kind of you've kind of met their level of like competence, and they're like, okay, I can't. No, I need to defer you up.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me get my manager on the line.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. We need to go to level 3 support, you know.
Yeah. So you're going along, you've in life like this, and these things are kind of coming up and causing little seeds of doubt to be planted. What is it that, I guess, where do you go from there, or when did it start to significantly change when your doubts became kind of, well, significant?
Well, there are a couple things that, conversations that I remember that, where I put my head in the sand, but it made me think. I had to kind of go back to that conversation days after. And so I had a really good friend here in Cincinnati, and she's an agnostic. And so I had never heard, agnosticism before. And so she had to explain it to me. And so she had challenged me on a subject of slavery and the goodness of God. And so how could a good God give rules to slavery? And so I gave the canned response, which I get so much, which is, at that time, God allowed it, like he did marriage. And, and because of the wickedness of man, you know, God had to deal with this, aspect of human life. And therefore he
Wow.
gave rules to it to make sure it all made sense. And so we're not there anymore. We're under a new covenant, and, we're all free under Christ, and da 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 da. And so, I remember giving all those nice little sugary responses, to slavery.
Yeah.
But it ended up bothering me because, after a while, you start thinking about what that really is. Within slavery, slavery is like a package full of like very bad things.
Yeah.
It's not just, owning another person, but within the realm of slavery, there's rape, there's brutality, there's splitting up of families. I mean, there's all kind of things that are packaged within slavery. And
Yeah.
I had to think, I said, wait a minute, God will have you stoned over, working on the Sabbath, but slavery's not good enough for him to put his foot down.
That's crazy.
And so just those little things and those little conversations about, is God good, made me think. And I started thinking, like, there's no way he can be good if he's commanding people to go pillage this, neighboring village or community and take the spoils of war, including the women for yourselves. you know, I don't really think
Yeah.
that they're, kind of becoming your third wife voluntarily. So,
Right, right.
and in certain cases, they're taking them as concubines, or you're just taking them for whatever
Mm-hmm.
uses they have for them. And since a man has evolved, to be as good as we are now, quote unquote, even with the Me Too, movement, just think about a less evolved man who was unchecked in that period of time, what he's going to do with a woman from a village that he just took over. So,
Of his enemies.
yeah, of his enemies. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's
just
crazy.
just thinking about goodness, and I realized that the more and more, I talked to my friend who was agnostic, I started seeing my own BS.
Mm.
I would give a response to someone, and immediately I would get that twinge of, that's total crap.
You're like, oh man,
And,
I don't even believe in what I'm saying.
right. And so you don't even believe what you're saying anymore. And so I couldn't even really look at myself in the mirror, giving these BS responses to things that I thought were
Wow.
very serious issues. This is different than whose cake or pie is best. These
Right.
are very serious issues about morality and justice, and so I started kind of going down the road pretty fast at that point.
And is this post college at this
So
point?
this is post college. This is in my mid 30s,
Okay.
mid to late 30s. So another friend of mine from college, we were having a conversation, and she said, "You know what? I don't think I'm Christian anymore."
Oh wow.
And I hadn't heard anyone announce that before. Like, just the
Wow.
announcement of that at the stage where I was at, kind of going through like, man, I'm really trying to make Christianity work at this point. It's like you're trying to pull two, ends of a rope together, and you're trying to make those things fit and connect. And I'm really trying at this point. And the announcement of a friend of mine who was very close to me at the time, saying that I just don't think I'm Christian anymore. That
Wow.
was a liberating thing to hear for me at that time in my life. So uh, I thought to myself, I said, you know what? I said, I've been fighting it so much. I don't think I am either.
You said that to her right in that moment?
Yeah, yeah. I said,
Wow.
and so, we had a conversation about it. I didn't know what it meant, because once you kind of make that affirmation, where do you go? Who are you? You know, so, I would go to different churches, and now I'm listening for all the discrepancies, just
Hmm.
to kind of prove myself right. Like, for all these
Yeah.
years, I've been listening to all these scriptures and all these sermons, and, and a little bit being a preacher's kid, I've got a pretty good ear for, some of the theology and the way that they use scriptures during their sermons. And I can
Yeah.
kind of tell, like, oh, he's using that scripture the wrong way, and da da da. And so now I'm doing it just to say, you know what? All along, they've just been stringing us along, because if they believe in this Bible and they choose
Mm-hmm.
to preach it incorrectly, do they even believe it? So I started having doubts about even the preachers. Like, I don't even know if these preachers believe what they're saying, you know?
Wow.
And so I started doing research, and I started looking up, different atheists, type of websites and thought. And that was kind of directing me towards, looking at, the age of man in the Bible versus, what archaeologists were finding, out in Africa and digging up different places. Um, and they were finding with science that, mankind, the evidence of mankind with the bones, and, you know, uh, agricultural tools, and weapons and bowls and artifacts. They were dating this stuff like well past, the to 10,000 years that, people were saying that the earth and humankind were around. So,
Yeah.
I started, just kind of writing some thoughts down. And I said, well, if mankind was here 50 to 100,000 years ago, and the Bible says that the first man was created like 6,000 maybe years ago, I said, well, that kind of means that creation story is bogus.
Yeah.
And I started thinking through a lot of the things that I had held to be true, and now I'm like free to apply like logic and reason and evidence to all this stuff, and I could clearly just start crossing stuff off. Like, this isn't even historical. Cross off.
Yeah.
And so that was
Wow.
for me, and so that's a whirlwind. You're digging into it. I mean, I'm really, really excited about this new, you know, information and new way of thinking, and but also scared because everything I know is church and religion and faith wrapped around it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow. So, did you talk to anyone beyond that one friend about some of these doubts and the things you were reading?
well, I would um, chat with some folks who um, I had known from childhood about it a little bit. But I wasn't ready for those full-fledged conversations,
Yeah.
and so, at the
Because it's
time,
kind of hard if it's a sorry to cut you off. It's kind of hard if you're having that conversation with a Christian because their job is to convince you and pull you back. So if you're not quite ready for that, it makes sense to kind of take your time to learn the things you're learning on your own.
yeah. So at the time, I was still in Florida, um, and so some things were happening in my family where I moved back to Cincinnati, and so, I moved back to Cincinnati, and I'm single, and I'm kind of, trying to figure out, what types of organizations I want to serve in and volunteer at, and kind of reconnecting with different friends, and so I started to realize how much of my life was wrapped up in religion, and
Wow.
so, there were things that bothered me now, um, about just the privilege of religion. The privilege
Yeah.
of religion was something that I kind of made a similarity to as when it comes to, I guess, racial privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I noticed that there were events that were not religious, but events would start off with prayer. I'm like, wait a minute, this is not a religious event. It might be a community event, but in the Black community, church is everything. Like, it is the Black community, the church experience is everywhere. So, and I kind of noticed the difference between, things that went on in white communities and things that went on in Black communities.
You
And
mean in the church communities or in the atheist communities
well, no, just
or
this is
both?
just the if you're kind of looking at subsets of, our culture here, and you've kind of got
Mm-hmm.
like a more Black culture and a white culture and some other cultures mixed in.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I attended, say, a gala, and this was for, say, the March of Dimes, just to make one up, but it's mostly a predominantly white organization. You have some Black people there, but it's kind of more ran by, more white American. And a lot of times in one of those events, they'll kick off the event and people will have dinner, and there'll be, time for people to mix and whatnot. And you may not hear one prayer or one reference to God. But in the Black community, say if it's an Urban League gala, right? Oh, baby, that's starting off with prayer, the whole deal. It's going to be a big corporate prayer. It's going to last about 5 to 7 minutes. you know. And so those are some of the differences, even in civic organizations where, these are volunteer organizations. If they're going to have, a walk or, you know, any other type of event, in the Black community, this is starting off with prayer. And
Yeah.
so I'm a member of a particular civic organization. I don't want to, shout it out
Oh,
in
that's
this
okay.
interview, but I'm very heavily involved in a civic organization. And so I'm in a committee meeting for, one of the things that I'm involved in. And they say, okay, well, let's start off in prayer. And I said, hey, I'm not really down with that. I said, this is a civic organization. And, if you guys want to pray, maybe you should do that individually. But I don't see that a civic organization should really support one religion over another. So it's probably best that we don't, do this at all. And so they kind of, whoa. But they couldn't really argue against my point because
Mm-hmm.
it was a pretty clear and pure point that I made.
Yeah,
Um,
that's pretty brave of you to speak up like that
and
at a public thing like that, or not public thing, but like in the meeting, at a
yeah,
secular
that took
organization or whatever.
that took a lot of time to develop. Before I just, this is just, people being people and Christians thinking, prayer goes everywhere. Um,
Just going along with it, but at that point you were beyond that, and you were felt comfortable saying, "Hey, we're not going to do that. We shouldn't do that here. It's a civic organization."
yeah, and
Yeah.
and I've done that several times now. So I've been an atheist, I would say about 6 years now, and well, I guess you could say I started off thinking that I was more agnostic, and then as I moved down the scale, I realized, what, you're an atheist, Um, but that's been a 6 year journey for me, and I think within those 6 years, you kind of go through that enthusiasm, and you're having all these conversations with people now. You got this new information, and I'm right, and I know what I'm talking about now. And then you kind of mellow out, and you realize, hey, I still have a lot of information to take in. There's a
Yeah.
lot of subjects that I'd still like to find out about, and areas I like to be a lot more solid, with.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of get more comfortable, in who you are. This is just me, and so the me that was, a Christian, would speak out about things that I didn't feel were right, and that's kind of where my parents, played a major role in who I was because that's exactly what they did. And so I think I
Mm.
said something earlier about, talking to my parents about it, and I told them, hey, you guys made me who I am because
Yeah.
you didn't raise, children who didn't question things. We questioned, we read, we got clarity. We wanted to make sure that we were correct, and we took a solid stance. We could,
Yeah.
we could get behind that. So, when I told my parents, they weren't terribly surprised. Um, but
Interesting. So maybe they saw it coming.
I don't know if they saw it coming. I just think that, your kids, and, you know, um, they realize that, I'm the type of person who is going to think for myself. And I've always been a question asker. I probably bugged the hell out of them when I was a kid. Um, if I were raising me, I would have sent me to my room like plenty of times. So I don't think they didn't seem surprised, which shocked me at the time. I
Oh, that would
thought,
shock me. Yeah.
yeah, I thought, being a preacher's kid, I really thought that, they were just gonna just why and make a big deal of it. I mean, it was just okay. And I remember my dad kind of being curious about me. And I'm not sure if we're at the dinner table or at a study or whatnot. And he said, Treigg, you don't talk about God anymore. I haven't heard you mention anything about God. And so I'm thinking, well, here we go.
Buckle up. Here it
Here it
comes.
comes. And, there wasn't really a reaction. From time to time, they'll say they're praying for me and whatnot. But no real big reaction. I think I've gotten the biggest reactions from people that I had relationships with from church.
Hmm.
And a few of those people are questioning themselves at this time.
Wow.
And so, you'll run back into old friends and folks that you are pretty close to, and the subject will come up. And I say, I don't go to church anymore, and here's why, and da da. And a few of them say, well, man, I've really been thinking about that myself. There's the church we went to had some issues. I mean, some really big issues that may not make you question your faith, but sure enough, probably make you want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so, we would talk about those things. And, I really believe that, some of those questions would be things that they would only share with me because they know I've left, religion. So I'm probably a safer person to talk to
Right.
about your questions and your doubts and concerns. Um, and so, a few of them had some really heavy things happen to them in life where their faith was put to the test. And so when they realized that some of those words that they said, or some of the words that people would speak to them, when they started realizing how empty those words were, because when you
Mm.
apply it and nothing comes of it, and you continually go down that road of trying to apply what you believe in, and it doesn't come back the way you think it would, you start realizing how empty a lot of the things and beliefs that you held so dearly. So,
So you
uh,
think it was like praying for healing for a sick loved one, or
oh,
what types
exactly.
of things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, praying for healing, um, even when it came to the support that they thought that church would have given them, and they didn't get
Mm.
that support, they started thinking, hey, you know, these are my brothers and sisters in Christ. Why have they abandoned me? Type
Mm.
of thing. Um, and they started realizing that, some of the rituals that they were doing, they started realizing, yeah, I kind of made some of that stuff up, that speaking in tongues and that other stuff. I always wondered, who was really doing it for real, and who was, just repeating some of the words they heard other, church members say. So,
Yeah.
so that was kind of interesting to talk to just a few of them about. But I got the most surprise from those relationships, that I had made in church, and a lot of them I felt were very good people.
The people who are no longer, or sorry,
Well,
the people
both
that are
sets.
questioning.
Yeah, both sets. I
Okay.
mean, the people
Yeah.
who were very surprised, who were still kind of gung ho and whatnot, and still with the church, and then the of course the people I thought that were still questioning. Very good people. Um,
Yeah.
I still feel close to them when I see them out. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is part of my childhood, and
Yeah.
how I grew up. So they're very much
That
a part of me.
that resonates with me a lot because there's a lot of like my former youth pastor, and I just think of these different people that were really close to me when I was with the church, and I don't see these people anymore, and you kind of miss them, and it's like I felt so close to them as a friend, and it's weird now that we're on different sides of the faith fence or whatever, but I still think they're nice people. I still think he's a good guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, faith has nothing to do with the friendship
Right.
in my mind. But I think Yeah, but I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe faith is the reason some of these friendships existed.
Yeah.
But what you were saying is just that they, those relationships are dear to you, and they're, they were good people back then, and you still consider them good friends now, and you leaving the church doesn't change that.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the sad things is when you leave the faith, and I'm sure this happens for other religions as well. I'm sure Muslims and Buddhists and many other religions experience when you leave that particular religion. You kind of feel a empty void where that
Yeah.
congregation used to be. And so, I was looking for that. When I moved back to Cincinnati, I'm really looking for, hey, I mean, what's going to replace this? I mean, a lot of my friends, they're in church or asking me what I'm doing on Sunday, da da da. And I lost my appetite to even hear about God for a while. Like, I don't even want to hear church talk, so maybe part of me was kind of distancing myself from people who talked about God a lot, because I just didn't want to hear it. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't want church to be a part of my world where I'm always defending myself. Or
Mm.
I didn't want this to be a conversation all the time. Like, I'd gotten past that whole zeal of, experiencing something new in my life to the point where I'm like, I just want to sit and talk about football or the weather or, politics or something, So uh, I
Other
remember
than
on one,
church, yeah.
yeah, something other than church. So I remember I was on Facebook and, I'm chiming in on different posts and whatnot. And I would love it when, someone on Facebook would say something about something religious, and I would just kind of drop a little comment in there. And what I would look out for, and I'm not sure if I was doing it on purpose, but I would spot people who said something that wasn't religious, that was kind of against the grain. And
Mm.
so I took a chance, at a few people, and I just inboxed them and I said, "Hey, are you an atheist?" So that's how I kind of jumped into this group that I'm a part of now,
Cool.
Skeptics of Color here in Cincinnati. And so, it's just a small group of us who, some of us, grew up in a religious household and some didn't. But it's kind of our own little community of people who, we stick up for each other on Facebook posts, and we go out to eat, or, we'll just chit chat and share, funny religious memes and, all kind of stuff. So, uh,
Yeah.
but it's a place where you can kind of drop off your conversations that you want to have where you can't have other places. And so, that's been a pretty good, um, I won't say it was able to fill that whole void of the church community that I used to have, because that was such a big part of my life.
Mm.
But I'm pretty happy with knowing that you kind of want to know that you're not the only one, even if you have
Yeah.
strength to kind of make that declaration. Hey, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm not a this anymore, and you have that strength, but you still kind of want to know that, hey, I'm not the only one, and I've got some camaraderie, somewhere close to me. There's some people that I can share what's on my mind, and I don't have to get browbeat by the Bible, because it
Right.
doesn't match what they're saying. So, uh, it's been a pretty good group to be in, and so that kind of sparked my interest to find other groups on Facebook and social media, for atheists, for free thinkers, for skeptics, and so I started finding that, um, man, within the atheist community, even within the Black atheist community, there's so much variation in thought. And so, within the Black atheist community, I found that there's some really good intellectual, free thinking, kind of people who really, I guess, exemplified the group that I found. Very forward thinking, progressive, type of humanist, conversations going on there.
Yeah.
And so you would have that range, and then you would have, I've left Christianity and I'm kind of still spiritual, and, I'm still really big into astrology, and there's some, it's almost like the Star Wars where it's the Force. I still believe in the Force. This is being that, binds us all together. And so you have a lot of that. You have a lot of kind of, I've left church, but now I'm going to embrace, some African religions a little bit, not wholeheartedly, but, I'm going to play around with that kind of thought. And so you have that. And so I think the race thing is a big deal when it comes to Black atheism, because, through slavery, a lot of people realized that, hey, Christianity was used, to indoctrinate a lot of the people who came from Africa to make them more docile, right?
Yeah.
And so when you leave, well, when I left, and I guess several others, many others, when you have that mass exodus from Christianity, you're kind of like relieved, like, yeah, I've finally kind of broken free. But part of it's a little anger, because you're like, man, I have been hoodwinked for a long time. And not only me, but my family, my ancestors, all these people.
Yeah.
How much information have I been blinded, away from? So, when it comes to Black atheism, there's a little bit of an anger there, like, hey, this is something that, has been very detrimental to the people who look like me.
Yeah.
And so now you're not just seeking more information about just humanity, you're seeking more information about, your race. And so
it kind of gets you mad. It's like it's been used, like you said, kind of as a tool of the oppressor to, keep other groups of people down.
Yeah.
And it gets you mad, not just like, oh, I'm discovering, maybe the Bible isn't completely literal, and oh, maybe God doesn't exist, and this is kind of exciting. It kind of, when you start thinking about how it was used to keep slaves under control, then I imagine like that's like I don't know, an increased sense of like righteous indignation, just anger at that.
It's that. And so now you have nothing to guide you. You don't have any structure for where you go with that, with this new kind of, mental and spiritual freedom. Where do you take that? And so, if I kind of feel like a lot of people don't have anyone to guide them once they leave, religion.
Yeah.
And so, I used humanism to kind of guide me, when I left religion.
Yeah, that's good.
But there's so many other areas that kind of pull, ex-Black Christians, away, and sometimes into something that almost looks like another religion. So, there's so many. It's almost like, with Christianity, there's so many denominations, right? If you get saved, which one are you going to pick? Are you going to pick, Methodist? Are you going to be Catholic? Are you going to be Baptist? Are you going to be Southern Baptist? Are you going to be Apostolic? Be AME? And so when you leave, you almost have a similar amount of choices, sitting there waiting on you.
Wow.
And so, it's kind of, I feel lucky a little bit that I kind of ran into the folks that I ran into once I, got back to Cincinnati and joined this Skeptics of Color.
That's
and
great.
and so that was very kind of uh, it was very impactful, um, and it kind of filled a little bit of a void. And and so I was looking for more still. I said, well, this is
Mm-hmm.
nice. We have a good group here. I said, I wonder if there's a national group that can kind of bring it all together, and we can be a part of something bigger. And so that was kind of my ambition. Um, and the one that kind of stuck out was the Black Non-Believers, because it really seemed like they were very pro science and pro reason and free thinking and humanist, and but they had all that packaged in a space that was had a it was a space for black people who had left the black church, and we could kind of talk about some of
Mm.
those things. And so it's not that white people or Chinese people or Mexican people aren't invited. It's more so we don't have to explain stuff every conversation. You know?
Well, it's you have a unique experience, and like I wouldn't know, and other white people wouldn't know necessarily what it's like to be in a black church, a black community, to have those kind of experiences that are common
Yeah,
to you
absolutely.
and people, who've gone through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I started following that, and really, I would say at the end of this past year, so the end of 2017, myself and another member of Skeptics of Color, we touched base with Mandisa, who's the founder of Black Non-Believers, and she's in Atlanta. And we had been inquiring maybe for a year about starting a branch here in Cincinnati. And so we just got that off the ground.
Oh,
So we
cool.
have a Black Non-Believers of Cincinnati now. And so, we literally just pulled all the folks from Skeptics of Color into Black Non-Believers of Cincinnati. But now I feel it's a brand that we can use here in Cincinnati to attract other folks who are just like us, because it can't just be, us, 10 people, who've left
Yeah.
Christianity. And so with that brand, I really like to develop a safe space for other, ex-black Christians or whoever who wants to be a part of our organization, um, and give them a space where it's filled with the type of free thinking and the type of reason and science based type of thought.
Yeah.
So because I think we have a really good culture in our group, and others who are questioning. I really believe that that's the type of culture they need to be exposed to, um, because just that fact based, science based, reason based, type of space is going to help them develop and kind
Yeah.
of stick with it a little bit. And we can point them to Richard Dawkins, and we can point them to Anthony Penn, and we can point them to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you know all these great thinkers of our time. We can point them to those resources to kind of get coached up into
That's
learning
cool.
how to think and be critical and evaluate things on their own.
Well, something that I've been thinking about as you've been talking, like early on, you mentioned things like this, and even now, there's kind of a theme of how people influence other people, either to stay Christian, which was your experience early on, or now when you heard someone open up to you about being agnostic, that kind of opens you up, and then as you open up to other people, they're opening up to you, and then as you find this group, like you're making yourself more available to help those who are coming out atheists to be more comfortable, and I just think it's really cool, and I just think it's great because the biggest void, I think I agree with you, is not having the church around when that's been everything, and in the black community it being such a big deal, and being such a big part of I don't know, your connection to your community. When you lose that, it's got to be even harder. So it's really cool that groups like Skeptics of Cincinnati are around, and Black Non-Believers. It's great for those deconverts who are coming out, who need some kind of connection. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. I I realize that when you feel that you're missing something, or you have a need, or you have a question, or you need some help in an area, I've realized a long time ago that once you get what you're looking for, realize that there's a whole lot of people who are feeling the same thing that you were feeling and have the
Yeah,
same needs and whatnot. So, um, and recognizing that, I'm kind of driven to make sure that, the next person can find that resource quicker than I did.
that's cool. That's awesome. Well, I have a few kind of follow up questions, just reflections on kind of your experience. Um, and the first question is, when you think back on the Christian version of yourself, now you're an atheist, you're part of an atheist group. When you think back on the Christian version of yourself, what do you think about that person now?
I'm very much the same person, but with less excuses. I think that the Christian version of myself was always searching for something pure that made sense to him, that he could, jump into without question and say, hey, this is my stance, this is who I am, and have no reservation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the Christian version of myself was always looking for that, and in whatever arena he was in. So, whether it was in, giving back to the community, or whether it was in which denomination that I'm more comfortable with, or which church that I want to be a part of, or which leader I wanted to kind of emulate, I was always looking for something pure. And so I'm relatively the same person. I just think now I'm free of the obstacles that would stop me from finding those places that I want to be in life. When you join an organization, no matter what stage of life you're in, you feel like the cause that that organization stands for, you can get behind, you're proud of, you can kind of wear that on your chest. And so, I guess previously, before I had, left religion, I would join something and not realize, man, I just don't believe in this anymore. And I fall out,
Hmm.
and I join something again, and man, yeah, it's almost there, and I fall out. So I was kind of searching for, things that I could stand behind. But I was hindered a lot by my religious beliefs. I would join an organization and like, they have gay people in here. I can't get behind this, or whatever it would be.
Yeah, some theological difference.
Yeah, my theological differences would stop me from really connecting to organizations that I probably love now. And so I think I was so limited, before, I allowed really surface things, to stop me from, doing what I really felt was the right thing to do inside. I think I'm relatively the same person. I just don't have the barriers I had before.
Yeah. Well, is there something that you have learned or experienced that you can think of that you may not have experienced or learned if you had stayed a Christian?
Yeah, I think that um, I wouldn't know how to. I think I want to use the word love. I wouldn't know how to love if I had stayed Christian. When I look at, the concept of love, you know, I don't think that you can truly love if you feel that you're superior to another person. If you feel that you're superior to gay people, or you feel that you're superior to Muslims, or you feel that you're superior to white people or black people or whoever. That's a tough position to love someone from. So I would say that, that's something I've learned since, I've become a humanist. And that whole empathy piece, that's part kind of wrapped into that love. If you can't empathize with another person for some very surface reason, then that's a very difficult position to love from.
Kind of along those lines, when I became an atheist, it freed me up to look into the idea of someone being gay. Like before, it was just not even an issue that I would look at because the Bible says, homosexuality is wrong. But it was kind of neat when that was, those shackles were taken off, and I could just go, oh, okay, I can kind of like think about this logically, and from a human perspective, and not worry about what God might think. So,
Absolutely.
like you're saying, like it kind of frees you up to love people for who they are and not discard them or yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just
absolutely.
think that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So that was was really, I think I was most proud of myself when I was able to do that.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. That's a great message too, like I just think so many Christians view atheists as like immoral and bad, and
Yeah.
what you're saying is like love is the best thing, It's like the opposite of
Yeah,
what a lot of
absolutely.
Christians would think.
And I think that was that was the stigma I had put on it when I left religion, and why I kind of, I saw the word atheism, and I'm looking for something else, and I saw, agnosticism, and so I said that just sounds like so much of a better word, and until I realized that point, that I was given a gift of being able to remove all those obstacles that I had in front of me that were taught to me. I was able to remove all those obstacles and truly love everyone that I saw, you know, based off of just them being human.
Yeah. What's something when you look back, you said you're the same person you used to be, and obviously you've changed, in as far as religion goes. But when you think back about who you were as a young Christian, young devout Christian, and then now you're an atheist, part of Black Non-Believers, that's a big transition. But what's something about yourself that stayed the same? Something positive that you see in yourself that was always there?
My passion for other people, has always been there. Um, just that whole thought, and I think I kind of expressed a little bit of it earlier, not wanting people to have the same challenges that I had. So, I've always been an advocate for removing hurdles so that people can get to where they need to get to.
It's cool.
And so, I've always been the type who's kind of looked out for someone who couldn't defend themselves. And I even think back on elementary school, and I remember my best friend was a bully. And so I remember one recess we're out there, and he's picking on this guy who was a lot smaller than him. But this guy who was a lot smaller than him was the same size that I was, right? And my
Ah.
bully was a lot bigger. I was a little, short, thin little guy. And so he's picking on someone my size, as a matter of fact, right? And I got up the nerve to defend this poor little guy who my best friend was picking on. And that was my first fight, like ever. I still remember that to this day,
Oh, wow.
because I couldn't stand for someone who couldn't defend themselves to sit there without anyone else jumping in. And so I think I've always been that person. So even when I look at, um, one of the things that makes me angry about Christianity and religion sometimes is that it picks on people who are vulnerable. When you pick on the gay community and tell them they can't get married, or, you pick on young girls who get pregnant, but you don't pick on the guys who got them pregnant. You know, so those things make me really angry. So I think my passion, even grows even more when I see that, to make sure that I can spread, this opportunity for folks who are kind of on the fence to kind of think about where they stand when it comes to their religion, so that we can have less and less of those things going on.
That's wonderful. I absolutely love that. Just the idea, the way you put that Christianity picks on people that are vulnerable, and then you named, the gay community, or a young woman who's gotten pregnant, and that's so true. That was a really great way of putting it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's I hadn't thought about that till now.
Yeah, that's great. No, I just think it's flipping the morality card. I don't know. It's flipping it on its head. It's kind of, it's that whole thing we were just talking about with Christianity feeling like it has the moral high ground, but it's picking on vulnerable people. That's not moral. That's not good.
And what's funny is I remember watching a interview with Steve Harvey, and it might have been Larry King who was asking Steve Harvey this question about atheism, and he's like, "I just don't understand it. Where do you get your moral compass?" And I remember just laughing at that. Like, that was just the funniest thing to me. Like, where do you get your moral compass? Really?
It's like he has to be told how to behave to know what's right or wrong. Or
right.
something.
Yeah.
Well, if there's someone listening right now to your story and they have just deconverted, what encouragement or piece of guidance would you give them?
I would suggest that they never forget what made them make that big decision in their life. Like, never forget why you questioned. Never forget what took you over the edge. Hold on to that, because that's kind of pure. Those things that make you realize, I don't believe this stuff anymore. Hold on to that, and never forget it.
Well, what's one resource that you would recommend for someone deconverting?
I would read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. I would read The God Delusion right away.
Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you wanted to share?
And thinking about all the reasons. And so the advice that I gave about never forgetting what kind of took you over the ledge as far as religion is concerned. And I think back and I make sure that I hold on to, those reasons, about all the empty words that were said to me, and all the empty words and phrases that I repeated.
Mm-hmm.
I remember those. I remember when, a preacher would hold up the Bible and say, this book has all the answers. I don't need anything but this Bible, da 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 da. And I remember thinking, well, wait a minute, aren't there some lost scriptures? Did they recover everything? How can you say that, this book contains everything that, someone needs? And thinking back about, all the scriptures that said, whatever you ask in my name, I'll do. And remember all the times that you ask something in this name, and the majority of times, those things were pretty empty. They didn't happen. And so all those quote unquote promises of God, and all those scriptures that, were said to you that were supposed to work, and remembering how empty those were, and how they almost never worked, and,
Mm-hmm.
and how many lies were in this book of truth. I remember that. And so even that gives me a little bit of empathy for some of the people who are still in religion,
Yeah.
because, they're hanging on to empty stuff. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about kind of now, as I kind of reflect on even the advice that I've given.
If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way that they can reach me is on Facebook. My first name is spelled Treigg, last name Turner. You can find me on Facebook. Or you can go to Black Non-Believers Cincinnati and send me a message, and we'd love for you to join us.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. Well, Treigg, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to come on the podcast and telling your story. I really enjoyed it, and really appreciate you getting out there and telling people what you went through to help others who were out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that Mandisa from Black Non-Believers, asked us to pop on here and do your podcast. I had a really good time. This was very cool. This was my first, atheist interview and experience kind of getting out there. So, before I was just really in my own little, atheist community here in Cincinnati, but I kind of feel like I'm really stepping out there a little bit. So it's pretty cool.
It's good getting to know everybody. These go kind of long, but it's always, I always enjoy it. It's always fun hearing what folks have gone through and what they take away from it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, yeah. Thanks so much. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
All right. Thank you, and you have a good evening, and hopefully we can do something like this again.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, check out our newsletter at vodpodcast.com.